Hi, it's Robert Mendelson, Fractional CMO here in beautiful Montreal, welcoming you to another episode of the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. We're part of Fractional Pros Canada, the home for Canada's fractional community, and you can find us on Facebook. We bring you conversations about everything fractional that matters for fractional executives and businesses from coast to coast. Think of this as your go-to spot for real talk, practical wisdom, and strategies you can actually use, all without the corporate fluff and with plenty of Canadian content. Whether you're a fractional pro or a business in our great country of Canada and beyond, this conversation is for you. Grab your espresso and let's dive in. Welcome to the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. I'm your host and fractional CMO, Robert Mendelson, here in beautiful Montreal. And joining us from all the way down to the other side of the street, from Langley, British Columbia, is Randall Plitt. Randall is a seasoned operational leader with over 25 years of experience across manufacturing, construction, and the entertainment industry. And he helps mid-sized companies get unstuck by building the clarity, unity, and capacity they need to scale. Today's episode is sponsored by the Fractional Pros Canada.ca directory. Fractionals show the business community that you aren't just dabbling, you're a serious fractional executive. Be ready to help Canada's business leaders who are coming to Fractional Pros Canada.ca right now, looking for vetted, trusted fractional pros like you, gain the credibility that comes with being part of the home of Canada's fractional community. Go to fractionalproscanada.ca, get listed. Tell the world you are open for business. And speaking of people listed on the directory, Randall, welcome to the pod.
Well, thank you, Robert, and good morning.
Good morning. So, Randall, you have a really interesting, fascinating, multidisciplinary background. You've moved from the creative, fast-paced world of entertainment and events to the heavy metal environment of metal bending and thermoformed plastics. You've crossed the street a few times. I'm curious, let's start off with how those years in the entertainment industry, where the show must go on and you have to know your audience, how has that shaped your approach with operational efficiency in a manufacturing plant?
Yeah, I mean, there'll be a bit of a circuitous route there, like my career, I think. So yes, I started in mass audience entertainment, meaning fairs and festivals. There's an exhibition kind of like the CNE in Toronto, the Pacific National Exhibition out here that I worked with for a number of years and doing theme park shows and things like that. But always behind the scenes. And that's kind of where I like to be. Occasionally somebody pushes me in front of a microphone, but that behind the scenes piece has led to where I am today, which is really helping support the rest of the team shine. So that's part one. And I think the other part is on the storytelling side. You know, anytime there's a show, if it's we did corporate award shows, we did New Year's shows, all sorts of things, but there's always a story. And we as human beings are anchored in storytelling. And so having that through line about why are we here? What are we trying to achieve? That translates into the consulting world. When I stepped out of entertainment, my next stop was a manufacturing and construction company that does water slides. For those out on the West Coast, it's Whitewater West, you might have heard of. Worked with them for a number of years. And my adjustment there was show is typically to the second. And so fully scripted and queuing and everything else very much precise. And construction is to the week, approximately. So it took some adjustment. But the underlying theories hold, having a plan, being adaptable to whatever happens on the day, and anchoring somewhere in there to why we're all here.
And I guess it's a lot less stressful going from, producing live shows where, like you said, it's timed down to the second, to the, manufacturing world, construction world, where it's not seconds or minutes, like you said, it's weeks. That must be a relief, almost like a vacation at the beginning when you start doing that compared to where you're coming from.
I think it's stressed different. I guess it's probably a 10,000 hour thing at some point. It's when you're used to it. And also typically with shows, you get a lot of rehearsals. Unless you count your last pitch to your client, you don't get to rehearse with this client. So, and also it tangibly matters more yes, shows are about entertaining people and helping them have a good time or escaping whatever their current day is. But as we used to say, it's not brain surgery. Um, there's not lives hanging in the balance. And for some of these things in manufacturing construction, it's much bigger stakes.
You spent a lot of your career managing massive teams, navigating companies through the chaos of COVID and an acquisition. And you've said that in the end, the acquisition team had all the corporate knowledge they needed, making your role redundant, which sounds a little bit like what a classic fractional engagement is, which is the day we start is the day that we are trying to hire ourselves out of a job, so to speak, and leave the company a better place a few months or a couple of years down the road where there's a full-timer who takes our place. I'm curious, when all that happened, did you always know you wanted to move into fractional and consulting space, or is there a specific moment where you realized your skills were better suited for fractional, or you just decided to make the switch? Tell us about your journey.
Yeah, I think it was probably more the latter. It wasn't something where I know what I want to be when I grow up. I do have a catchphrase. I have a lot of catchphrases, but I have a catchphrase of what do you want to do? What do you want to do in the future when you retire? And I used to say, I want to sail around the world and tell people what I think. So I guess maybe there was a little thread of that. Haven't monetized that yet, but there's a little thread of that in there. But really it was when I was in each organization that I was in, I was looking at all the disparate needs and disparate people in the organization and what the goals were, and synthesizing that together into a path forward. And that lends itself really well to consulting. I mean, I have a whole prep notes on the side here, and your intro kind of negated a bunch of it.
That's why I tell guests never to prep.
Fair enough. And that's where that clarity, unity, and capacity catchphrase came from. Is it starts from the top, I think when we spoke earlier, I mentioned what I do with clients often is I'll sit down with them and typically their partner, their husband or wife, their spouse, and say, this business is a tool for you to achieve what you want. I don't deal with private or public companies typically. So I'm dealing with a privately owned, usually single owner business. And this is a tool for you. So what do you want in your life to get out of your life? And this is a tool for that. And then that cascades through to, okay, what can the business do? How can the business help? What leg of your life is the business? And then it just carries on and cascades through. And having that clarity to start with leads you through unifying the team and having the capacity across that team to then move faster. There's a fourth one that I currently don't talk about because there's so much work in the first three. And the full line would be clarity leads to capacity, leads to unity, leads to agility.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to go back to the other catchphrase. This is interesting. So sail around the world and tell people what you think.
Yes.
First question, is that doing both those things at the same time, or are those two different things happening concurrently?
I mean, in the cheesiness of the catchphrase, you're sailing down to wherever and hopping off and working with a team for a little while and sailing somewhere else. I don't have a sailboat. So it really is one of those pithy sayings. There's another one that a cousin of mine said, which is when he retires, he wants to work 24/7, which is 24 hours a week, 7 months of the year.
Ah, okay, all right. Yeah, we all made that. At least I fell to that trap. I made the assumption.
Yeah,
I made the assumption it was 7 days, 24 hours. Okay, interesting. That's a good one. 24 hours a week, 7 months a year.
Which works out, if you do the math, that's about 35% of a typical full-time job. And I think, when you get to retirement, and I'm a few years off of that, but when you get there, because work has been fairly central to my life, when I was working in entertainment, that's a pretty focused, when you're doing a show, that's pretty focused work. And there isn't really time for much of anything else. And that's kind of how I approach things now. And even when I'm working with a client, it's not that I'm there full time, but when I am engaged with them, I am deeply engaged in partnering with them. Um, so the thought of just shutting that off whenever that switch goes is a bit much. So I think there's something about, downshifting into fewer clients, fewer total hours, into that later stage, that's appealing for sure.
And the part about, telling people what you think, I mean, that talks to, let's talk about authenticity here for a minute, right? A lot of people, a lot of fractionals filter what we think because we have clients who we know are not going to take it well. They're not going to receive it well. And we got to be careful with what we say, how we say it. And in some cases, we say, we're just not going to say it because they're not going to listen to it anyway. So we just don't bother. How do you manage that? Clearly, you're somebody who wants to be authentic. If your dream is to go around the world and tell people what you think. So in the work world where you've got clients, how does that factor in, and how do you manage your authenticity?
Captured in a blog post I wrote some time ago now, know your audience. So sail around the world and tell people what you think, misses a big piece of it, which is whenever you're telling people what you think or storytelling, it's important you know who your audience is and how they would receive what you're trying to communicate. So, few years ago now, quite a few years ago now, I was working at a company, and shortly after I started there, one of the founder passed away, and it was a relatively small company, and it did become for me, okay, I don't have nearly the connection that all these people do to this person. I mean, certainly I talked to him as during the onboarding process, but it was literally my second day. And so it became, okay, well, I have a little bit of background in what to do next in terms of what do people care about? What are the audiences here, the team, what do they care about? Working through that and figuring out, okay, what is the message there that helps them understand where they're at? That would then be duplicated, I guess you would say, during COVID. So at the time I was working for a fairly large equipment rental company servicing film and television. And film and television stopped like that. Like I remember the phone call with leadership at 4:00 in the afternoon, and we closed. The next morning, we were not doing anything. There was some, okay, how do we get the gear back? How do we sequester it? All that kind of stuff. But that too, there was a large number of staff across the country in that business. And that became, there was, the leadership there was really, really good at understanding the importance of communication and setting up very quickly. There were weekly calls for the national team. And that became storytelling too, is, okay, what do people care about? That was not just what's happening in the business. It's, do I still have a job? What is happening in the world generally? Because it's not just business that was affected by that. And there was a lot of uncertainty across that multi-100 person team. And so it becomes, what do these people care about and what do they need to hear? And how do you communicate that? So circling back to uncomfortable messages, if there's a business that is struggling and it has to do with something that is a difficult message to deliver, it is about how you form that message in a way that's going to not only get through, but also be accepted by your audience. And that's storytelling in a way.
Yes, 100%. When you look at a client that you've helped to get unstuck, and you've done this a few times, you probably know the pattern now, you know the signs that the business has built up the agility or developed the agility that needs to scale without the owner being a bottleneck. Can you talk to us a little bit about what are those characteristics that are like the formula for success in those cases?
I think the big one, I'll go back to my catchphrase, clarity, unity, capacity. I think that's unity, which is translating that goal through the organization in a way that they help create the solution to, or whatever, they help bring the tools to point towards that goal. Um, oh, look, another catchphrase. What versus how? I've come across a number of companies and a number of organizations and people groups where people are telling the subordinates or the team underneath them how to do something instead of what they need, and let them figure out how. In fact, one of my prep things, when you asked me about AI, which I don't know if you were going to do,
Oh,
but
I don't see that on our agenda here, but go
oh,
ahead. Yeah,
you
we'll work
didn't
it in.
send me, but Robert, you didn't send me the agenda. But what I was going to say was AI is probably the best current example of the value of focusing on the what versus the how, because it can figure out how, and in ways that you can't even imagine. It's the same for your team, is telling them what the goal is and then supporting them to get there, supporting them and helping them figure out how to get there, is much more powerful than just giving them that task.
Yeah, that's been my experience as well as a business owner. And I made the mistake early on where I would say to, somebody, hey, we need to get this done. And it's something that I had been doing myself for the last couple of years until I started, hiring out a staff. And so
Mhm.
in my head, this task should take like an hour to do. And in the afternoon, I go back, check in with the person. So how's it going? And they're like, yeah, I'm figuring out how to do it, and I should have it done by the end of the week. And I made the mistake of really trampling all over them and saying, well, hey, come into my office. Let me show you how I've been doing it. It's really fast. And that was obviously just a terrible management
Hmm.
mistake. And
I
what I
I don't
learned,
know I don't know what you're talking about. I've never experienced that in any shape or form.
well, you're just perfect. Um, and what I learned was, I learned the lesson, and then there were situations on the other side where I I I went and checked in with the person who I'd asked to do something, and I saw they were doing it completely wrong. I didn't say a word. I said, "All right, great. Let me know when you're done." And you just let the accident happen, and
Mm.
then that turns into a coachable or teachable moment, and you go from there. But yeah, I learned a long time ago. Telling people how to do it, you might as well just hire a robot. You've now
Right.
robbed the person of all agency and feeling of satisfaction, and it's just an awful way to manage a team. And
Yeah.
if any, yeah,
And so getting that to stick, so sorry, you were talking about when you step away, and it is equipping that team, is probably the big one. Well, it goes through all three of them, I suppose. Is what are your goals really? What do you think you need to make those happen? And then pass that through the team and their team and their team, however many layers you've got there. And then at the tactical level, it can be about just strictly capacity. I'm helping one client at the moment who's got some they don't have the right people in the right seats, as it's been said by Jim Collins, I think it was. But it could be people, process, or technology that is limiting you as well, and you just don't have the capacity. You know where you're supposed to go. Everybody has said, "Yeah, please, let's go there," but we're missing tool X or person Y or process Z. And so checking all those boxes, if all those are humming well, then you don't need that temporary help. For a fractional leader, then that can shift into something else. So fractional leaders can be involved, you know, a lot of hours per month or less and less, depending on what the strength is in each of those areas. And so part of our job then is assessing that. Um, and that clarity, unity, capacity actually translates to us as well, is us knowing what our goal is and what our talents are and what we bring, and being able to communicate that clearly to our clients. And then if you think about it, the teams that we will work with fractionally are together 40 hours a week. So bridging that gap and unifying that team and yourself is critical. And once you do that, then you can bring your expertise, and a little bit of horsepower, but just your expertise to allow the team that is in business full time to achieve more. So that clarity, unity, capacity steps also apply to fractional leaders, I think.
Yes, and I would add that since I started my practice as a fractional a few years ago, my behavior changed again because when I had my own company, I didn't really hold back too much from being pretty direct with somebody and saying, here's the right way to do it, and I didn't really care if it was going to piss them off or not because they're my employee, right? What do I care?
Mm.
But now I'm a fractional. Nobody is my employee anymore. And I don't want to have anybody that I'm working with on a given team going to their manager and saying, hey, Robert, he's roughing me up. I don't like this guy, right? That's the last thing you want. So I've now learned how to kind of that third way where I can empower somebody on
Okay.
on the client's team to do something. I can coach them along and still walk that fine line of not telling them how to do it, but let's say if it's a bowling alley, somehow putting up those two long things that fill the gutters on either side so that the ball is not gonna they'll knock down at least one pin.
Right.
Right. Right. And then the other thing that's changing that dynamic, though, in the last, 6-12 months is, of course, agentic AI, where now there's a new question to ask in the process, which is before I figure out who the best person on the client's team is to do it, do I have an agent or can I build one really quickly that can do it, better, faster, etc., and not even burden the team with it? And that is the big game changer that's happening right now, of course.
Hmm.
And we're all rethinking everything. Is this,
Every
can
every
AI
couple
do
of
this?
weeks.
Can
Yeah.
AI do this?
Yeah.
Right.
I think too on the unity piece, is the more you were talking about whether you can say what you really think or that you had to kind of modify. And I think the higher the trust is, even in personal relationships, if you truly trust each other, you can make fun of each other for all sorts of things and it's okay. There's not an offense there because we know there's an acceptance between the two of us. And in business, that unity piece requires trust. I think that should be the goal for any of us is to foster and engender trust with the people that we're working with, because then you can be more direct and honest. And that is, well, look, I left this on my desk, but that piece speaks very well to the importance of trust in being unified and being able to accelerate the business through.
I mean, that's really the the table clearer, right? You get that trust, and you don't have to worry about what you say and how you say it. Well, you do a little bit, but you kind of know you've got that trust. People understand it's coming from a good place. You're joking around, et cetera, et cetera. And it just makes life so much easier, like you said, both in personal
Mhm.
life, family life, and business life. Speaking of which, going back to, you talked a little bit about it before, when you're working with, husband and wife owners of a company, and you're sitting at those dinners, and they start going at it. What do you do there? How do you mitigate that, and what kind of role do you assume in those conversations? Do you step in as the referee? I assume you got to be careful not to take a side. How do you manage that and kind of get them back on track so everybody's back on the same page?
I guess two things come to mind there. And the first is that's really easy. All I have to be is genuine. If I genuinely want you to succeed and achieve what you're trying to do, I can be pretty even-handed about either redirecting the conversation towards and what is the goal? Because really, if you guys don't agree on what your life goals are, then we probably have different issues to work through before we can work together, really.
Yeah.
Because that's going to be a big blocker for you, because you guys are in the business so much. Often that'll be about how do we how do we get to be less in the business on a day-to-day basis? But to do that, you need to know what your personal goals are and what your priorities are. So for me, it's pretty easy that way. And I've forgotten the second point. But genuineness makes it easy. Focusing on what do you guys actually want? Oh, there we go. And also, whatever that problem is what are we going to do with the business or whatever that is? There is a counseling technique, which is from couples counseling, which is put the problem in front of you and sit beside to solve it, rather than pointing at it from either side of that table. And that metaphorically works as well in terms of thinking about it as I'm communicating to them. I can even steer the conversation that way without actually saying the counsel speak.
Yeah.
The last thing that I have there is one of my little icon things down there is curiosity. Being genuinely curious. When I talk about that as a catchphrase, I've got this little mountain with the sun behind it, and it is respecting the existing piece and respecting the new, what somebody's bringing new to the thing. Is you need to be curious for both. Someone who's new to the organization, so a fractional leader, for example, needs to be curious about what exists there without jumping to the conclusion that your accounting system is antiquated or whatever that might be. And the people that have been in the organization, usually for decades or more, should be curious about the new, and bringing those two together to see what is possible by looking at both. I guess that'd be the third piece.
Yeah, and I like your point about bringing the conversation, especially when two people are disagreeing, bring it back to what's the problem, what's the outcome, that, and hopefully both parties are trying to achieve the same outcome or just coming at it from different angles. And when you put that back as the center of the conversation, it brings everybody back on the same page. Okay, we're on the same team here. We're just thinking about it differently. Let's negotiate that. And my next question I was going to ask you, because you had mentioned in our last conversation, I love this quote. You said, as a fractional, you can't wreck too much too quickly. And that kind of goes back a little bit to what you said about when you start with a client, be curious, right? And don't make assumptions, and don't, day two, you see they're using like an outdated, CRM or something like that, and just say, hey, you guys need this. That's wrecking too much too quickly.
Yeah, and really understanding them. And a story from entertainment days, we were working with a client to do a corporate award show for their staff, fairly big organization. And we eventually got the CEO to say what his goal is to not award the high performers, but show that he was really investing in the business as it was growing, and that he, not so much that he cared about the people, although that was certainly part of it. He wanted to communicate, we're paying attention, we're putting money into this, so you should feel good about it, kind of thing. Which is, and that's a little harshly said, but that honesty helped us create the right show. You take that, and knowing what his audience, so all his staff, want to see, and why they're there for award show, we weave those two things together, and then can achieve the show that achieves all of the goals. So I think that's where I mentioned off the top here somewhere about synthesizing disparate needs. Same thing. If spouse number one says what I really want is this, and spouse number two says what I really want is that, we can synthesize something together. Getting to the point of where people can be honest with themselves and with their partner, which is not always easy, and with me, lets us figure out the path to optimize all those things being achieved.
Let's talk about your favorite topic, AI, a little bit more here. So how is AI changing your business, and especially, in the last few months, as things just accelerate at a ridiculous pace with where AI is going?
I think it's mostly in the tools. Certainly, have I used it to do some business development intelligence research? Sure. Have I used it to distill a whole bunch of documents or help just a tactical piece? Yes. Um, for me, it's just another tool. I'm thinking about one of the clients I'm working with right now, and I'm helping them architect an RFP response system. And it's complicated, and you want to make sure you need to guardrail things well, and you need to have checks to see where it's headed, and you need to give it some good inputs. So there's a whole, their business specifically is different than every other business. You can't create a universal tool. You have to give it all the information about who they are and what they want and what they're going after and where their company excels. Um, so I'm working with them on building that tool. There's smaller tools as well. You know, I think it's been interesting just over the last week hearing about all the AI vloggers talking about the end of SaaS. And I do think that's true to a degree, as evidenced by, so I can go in and create a little digital in-out board pretty quickly with almost no effort that replaces a $10 a month something pretty easily. So I think there's little things like that it's going to enable is somebody in the marketing department is going to need a tool and they could just ask AI to spin it up for them, and that won't be a big deal. So I think it's going to democratize, I guess, to some degree. Somebody take the marketing, for example, who's not necessarily a technical person. They're not going to be writing software. But if they go, I'd like A, B, or C, they can do that. They just specify the what, and the AI figures out the how.
Yeah, I'm not. I think the reaction to, it's the end of SaaS is way overblown. I can see, replacing that $10 a month app with something you can now build with a relatively easy text prompt. But if you're using Salesforce or thinking about implementing an enterprise level CRM or something like that, I don't think, even if you knew that you could just have the AI build it for you, there's so many moving parts to it that, I mean, if I'm the CEO, I still want to buy the off-the-shelf package that I know is proven and is going to work despite the pain it might be to implement it. It's just a safer bet. So I don't see that going away anytime soon. So yeah, I'm still.
That's fair. I think too, any service that has a treasure trove of data. So I go to legal, even though the story I was watching was talking about how legal SaaS is in trouble. But when I go to legal and they have whatever thousands and thousands of documents of case history that they have tapped into and logged and categorized, and that is available to their tool. That's hard to replace.
Yes. And one of my favorite catchphrases these days is, when it comes to AI, it's not keep the human in the loop, it's keep the human in the lead.
I like when people twist what AI stands for, and I think augmented intelligence is one of my favorites. Is it's assisting you, and as you said, is the humans in the lead, and this is part of your team and part of the tools in your quiver.
Yeah. What other of your top 3 catchphrases have we not mentioned?
Well, I was thinking, you being in Montreal, where it's probably -5 or something, and they spew tons and tons and tons of snow into the river there.
St. Lawrence.
One of the ones that I've been talking about a lot lately is snowplow as a metaphor for leadership, and because I see leadership as being choosing the path and then clearing the obstacles out of the way. And that is useful for the leader to think about, because I've had leaders who are good at putting the blade down and driving, but they may not have chosen where to point the truck. And it also is a good metaphor in terms of your job is to help your people. not just direct them, not just put something up on the whiteboard and then run out. So your job is to clear that path. And then the third piece that metaphor works for is once you remove the obstacles, you're removing the excuses. So a team that says, I can't do this because, or I can't do that because, if you're snow plowing stuff out of their way, then those reasons for not achieving the goal go away.
I can tell you that nothing will upset a driver of a car, SUV, whatever, in the city more than when the snowplow comes by and hems them in with, a foot of plowed snow. So as good as clearing the path is, like you said, be careful where you're putting the stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And for those people who are not in a snowbound area, it's the other pieces. They just think plowed snow is the same as fallen snow, but it isn't.
It's more compact. It's harder to
It's a whole bunch of
heavier.
different. Yeah.
It's a whole different story. Interesting, because my childhood dream, and I think it still is, people ask me what I want to be when I grow up, and the answer hasn't changed in all these years. I want to be a snowblower driver. And I guess there's some kind of a leadership metaphor in there somewhere, where I'm almost like a super leader, where I don't just have the plow, I got the snowblower, so I can go anywhere and clear the path and direct the snow in about 180 direction that I choose. So including putting it directly in front of me and just continually re-blowing it until we find a good spot for it. So I what's better than that, right?
That's true. That is more flexible than just the blade on the front of the truck.
There you go. All right. Let's wrap things up on another philosophical note, as we always do here on the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. If you could put a message on a billboard that millions of business owners and fractionals would see every day as they drive by it, what would that message be?
It's pretty easy. You won't be surprised. Clarity leads to unity, leads to capacity, leads to agility. And there's a little arrow towards capacity or towards clarity, and it says start here underneath it.
I got the visual. Okay. Nice. Would you say that's the formula for success, not just for business, but for just living life in general?
Yeah, I mean it's pretty easy to adapt that to whatever it is. You're an individual, or your family, or the organization you're involved in, or your business. Choose where you want to go. Align either the people or the tools around you to get there. That'll give you the capacity to do it.
Beautiful. Randall, thank you so much for joining us today on the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. That's a wrap on another episode of the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. If you're a fractional professional based in Canada, we'd love to have you join us in the Fractional Pros Canada Facebook group, the home for Canada's fractional community. It's where Canadian fractional executives connect, share insights, and help each other succeed. Until next time, I'm Robert Mendelson, Fractional CMO. May your impact be full-time, even if your hours are fractional.